Harley Street, the centre of private healthcare in the capital city of London. Here the patients are privileged, the facilities extraordinary, and the doctors among the best in the world. But the man I meet today exchanges all of this opulence to conduct emergency surgery in the bloody chaos of Gaza, with the bombs raining down upon the innocents. Today I meet a real-life hero, Dr. Ghassan Abu-Sittah. Turkish Tea Talk with Alex Salmond on TRT World. Now, Dr. Abu-Sittah, we're here in the opulent surroundings near Harley Street in London, but you practice much of your medicine in hospitals in Gaza with bombs raining down. Well, tell me a bit about that contrast.
The contrast really comes from the need to lead a balanced life. As a father of 3 children, and then the war surgery really is the part of my life that gives it meaning and gives it depth and allows me to see life for what's important. And every time that I come back from war, I feel enriched because I am reminded of the important things in my life when I come back here.
Take us into a hospital in a war environment. I mean, we've seen the atrocities on television, we've seen the television reports, but take us right into a hospital, how you can conduct medicine.
So one of the most difficult things in the war is what we call triage, which is deciding which patients to operate on, which patients you're unable to save. And that gets worse as the war progresses because you run out of medicines, you run out of consumables, and the number of wounded piles up. And so it becomes a process in which you're trying to figure out, can you save this individual? Do they need to go to the operating room now? And is there a risk that the surgery would take so long that you would deny others access to a surgery that they would need? And it's a continuous process, and you're trying to do the best for the most number of people with whatever limited facilities that you have. What we don't see is the smell of death that stays with you, even at the end of the night when you try to go to sleep. What you don't stop hearing is that screaming and that look of terror that parents have when they're searching amongst the wounded in the emergency department, trying to see where their children are. It's those moments of absolute brutalism that the screens just can't capture.
What are the practical difficulties in performing medicine in that environment?
Especially this war in Gaza, where we ran out of almost everything. I mean, initially it was just antiseptic solutions, and then it became specialist burns dressings, and then it became morphine to give the patients for pain. And then towards the end of my stay in Gaza, we literally ran out of ketamine, and ketamine is the war surgeon's anesthetic. You inject it into the muscle, which means that you don't need to have the anesthetist with you. When we ran out of ketamine, I was at the Ahli Baptist Hospital, and there were so many patients because Shifa had collapsed. Al-Ahli, with its 2 operating rooms, was the only hospital left in Gaza city that was functioning. And in order to stop the patients developing sepsis, wound infections, because these patients were not getting to the operating room fast enough, we ended up having to do cleanups and wound debridements without anesthetic, without any pain relief. And the most difficult thing is doing it to children, children with massive wounds that I used to have to take to a clinic room with their parents. And the reason you did that is a child is much more susceptible to going very quickly, even within a day, from having a wound infection and being dead by the end of the day. Subjecting these kids to these horrendously painful procedures because you had no choice. You'd go around in the morning and you can smell the infection coming through the dressings, and you make that decision that unless you are able to wash that wound, you cannot save that child's life, at least by a few days.
How many times have you gone to Gaza in the course of your career?
So my first trip was while I was still a medical student at Glasgow, and I went as a volunteer in the first Intifada in the late 80s. And then as a junior surgeon during the second Intifada in 2002. And then the wars of Gaza, 2009, 2012, 2014, 2021, and then during the marches of return when the Americans moved the embassy to Jerusalem. And then other wars like Iraq, in the first Iraq war, the first American war in Iraq, and then the war in Mosul later on in the 21st century, and the war in Yemen several times, and to Syria, to Damascus several times.
And how does your experience at the end of last year compare with these other war environments?
It's the difference between a flood and a tsunami. All the components are there, but the magnitude is so much bigger that it becomes incomparable. I've never been in a situation where despite operating from 8 in the morning till 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock the following morning, you are behind because the sheer number of patients that are being brought in. You're talking about a situation where there's an ambulance coming in every minute, and each ambulance carries 5 or 6 wounded. And so you're continuously behind. Of what makes this war different is that the health system itself was the target of the Israeli military strategy. And so doing all this while the building is continuously shaking from the shelling around it.
And when you and your colleagues are also in mortal danger, one of your close friends died recently.
Well, when I was in Gaza, Dr. Midhat Saydam, who was a colleague and worked with him since 2009, literally it was one of those kind of in the afternoon, his sister and her children came to the hospital because they were running away from the bombing in their neighborhood. And he said, I'll just be half an hour, I'll take her to my house, my parents are there, my other siblings are there, and I'll come back to work. And he went and he never came back because within minutes of him reaching the house, the building was hit by an Israeli missile, and he was killed with his siblings, their children, his parents. And then after I left Gaza, just hearing more and more of the colleagues and friends who, the latest, a young plastic surgeon whom I had trained and I had worked with in Gaza, was executed by the Israeli army in Shifa in the last couple of weeks when they went back into Shifa hospital.
Now you and your colleagues have detected what you believe to have been the use of white phosphorus, which is illegal, internationally banned as a weapon of war. What evidence do you have for this, and what experience do you have which tells you that is what the wounds were caused by?
So in 2009 war, there was documented, and it was in the Gladstone report, that Israel had used white phosphorus. And so when I worked in the burns unit in Shifa Hospital in 2009, we were exposed to patients with phosphorus burns. And they're very distinctive. So phosphorus, the new form of phosphorus, the bomb explodes midair and it covers a wide area with a canopy of pellets of phosphorus that rain down on the victims. And when they hit the human body, because it's a chemical, it ignites when it is exposed to a mixture of the water in the tissues and oxygen, and it burns into the center of the body. So unlike heat or thermal burns that burn on the surface and then move in, this literally drills the patient all the way in. And when you have to cut it out, because it's a chemical, you need to take it out. You literally are burrowing into trying to find that remnant of the pellet that's still active. And then when you get to it, if you expose it to oxygen, it then reignites, and you have to get your assistant in the operating room to continuously be dousing it with water.
So this is unmistakable as an instrument of war, and indiscriminate, which is why it's illegal, because it affects soldiers, civilians alike.
First time in this war, it was on a 13-year-old boy and his father who were escaping the northern part of Gaza, and they were injured by phosphorus burns. And then the second time, the Israelis were targeting the civilians escaping from Al Shati refugee camp in Gaza City. And then they hit the maternity hospital part of Shifa Hospital with a phosphorus bomb, and we saw some of the victims coming from there.
Now, you've taken your account to The Hague, to the International War Crime Authorities. What response did you get from them in January?
So there were the two courts, the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. The International Court of Justice, part of the South African submission, had my testimony in it. And the International Criminal Court, I gave evidence to the investigators of the International Criminal Court, and we're still waiting and hoping that the chief investigator, Karim Khan, produces arrest warrants for the perpetrators of these war crimes.
Now, you were going to present this evidence, among your other experiences, of course, to a conference in Berlin. But you were prevented from doing so. Indeed, the entire conference was suspended. What exactly happened there?
So I landed at Berlin airport from Glasgow on the Friday morning at 10 o'clock in the morning. When I got to the passport desk, I handed my passport. And the customs officer or the passport officer asked me to step aside. A couple of minutes later, two policemen came and asked me to come with them, and I was taken to a kind of basement office, windowless office, where I stayed for the 3.5 hours. Towards the end of these 3.5 hours, I was asked to come to go to another room where there was an investigator and several policemen. I was asked why I was there, and I told them, I'm giving the evidence that I gave at The Hague, and this is who I am. And I was then told that I'm not going to be allowed into Germany for the rest of April because the conference has to be cancelled because they fear for the safety of people attending the conference. I was told that if I were to try to connect, when I go back to the UK, try to connect with the conference by Zoom or through sending a recorded video lecture, then I would be in breach of German law.
So they're presuming that German jurisdiction controls the airwaves.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And yet the British government haven't responded to say, well, these are our airwaves as well. No?
There has been no response from the British government, despite the fact that several MPs have written to the foreign minister asking for a response.
And why do you think you were prevented from speaking?
I think there is a major shift in the narrative of the Palestine question in the West, in Europe and in North America. And I think that the authorities want to silence Palestinian voices. They want to silence witnesses.
The shift being the shift of a population to a sympathetic position to the plight of the Palestinian people. But governments are very worried about that shift in their populations.
Absolutely. And we see it not just in what happened in Germany and the crackdown, but we see it in the crackdown within academia, within all institutions, against students or academics who speak out in support of Palestine.
But Dr. Abu-Sittah, you're a representative of that, because just before you were prevented from entering Germany, you had a resounding triumph being elected as the rector of your old university in Glasgow, the Glasgow University Rectorship, a hugely prestigious elected post by the students of the university. That must have given you a great deal of satisfaction.
Personally, it was because this is my university, because my experience in Glasgow was such a formative experience politically and intellectually in my life. But also, I saw it for what it really was. It was the students at Glasgow University voting for Palestine, voting against a genocidal war, voting to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, with the victims of this genocidal war, as they had done in the past when they voted for Winnie Mandela. And if you remember that, at that time, the Thatcher government with the Reagan administration were the last two governments that had provided complete political support for the regime in Pretoria. And therefore, again, it was the students basically making a decision in Glasgow that they were going to stand up at that stage for the people in South Africa and to join the struggle anti-apartheid. And now the struggle of the anti-apartheid movement is the struggle against Israeli apartheid in Palestine and the genocidal war.
And of course you have a resounding mandate of 80% to the student body. Many of us would envy that sort of mandate. But the university authorities are not quite as comfortable with your election victory, are they?
I think there is a coordinated and concerted campaign to try to silence academic institutions, to try to police academic institutions, and to bully them into silence. And all institutions where people are speaking out, and we can see it, not just in the academia, what's been happening in Google with staff being fired because they objected to a big contract that Google had signed with the Israeli military.
So you'll be using your new position as chair of the university court to stand up for freedom of speech as well as freedom for Palestine.
Absolutely. I mean, I recently heard an American academic say that universities are not a place that you go to until you enter the world. It's a place you go to change the world you want to go into. And that's what university life should be about. Should be about young people trying to change the world that they're going to have to inherit.
So graduating from Glasgow University, where did you enter practical medicine? Where did you cut your teeth in the medical profession?
So it was at the Glasgow Royal Infirmary that I did my house jobs. And it was at the Glasgow Royal Infirmary that really part of the unfolding of my awareness of the relationship between medicine and politics came about. I saw the consequences of asbestos and mesothelioma in some of the patients. I saw the poverty in the East End of Glasgow and the way it shaped and contorted people's lives.
These are some of the great industrial diseases from an industrial society in the west of Scotland that you were treating.
Absolutely.
But for the Abu-Sittah family, this was something of family tradition, was studying in Glasgow and practicing medicine from there, was it not?
So my father had arrived in Glasgow in '63 to train as a pediatrician and had worked in the Glasgow Royal Infirmary. And I think it was then that he kind of fell in love with the city and the people and the culture. Glasgow is a very distinctive culture. It has a sense of solidarity.
And from Kuwait, but of Palestinian extraction.
So my father was one of the Nakba survivors. So my family was in Beersheba and were driven out of their land in 1948 during the Nakba, in the ethnic cleansing that happened then, became refugees in the Gaza Strip. And then my father in the early 50s became that generation of Palestinians that moved to the Gulf and were instrumental in building the health systems and the educational systems.
So you've gone out of your way to find medicine in the most difficult areas. That's what's driven your relationship between your discipline and your life views.
I do believe that medicine was a social science, and that my patients whom I had started to see in Glasgow, their health was shaped by the social and economic conditions and the political conditions that shaped the lives of people in Glasgow. And as a Palestinian and a child of Palestinian refugees, the health of my people in the refugee camps in Gaza was being shaped by political events. And it was that experience that made me see the kind of interrelationship between politics, economics, and people's health.
So you practiced your medicine early in the west of Scotland, came to London, but in London as an experienced surgeon, you found yourself in huge incidents like the 2005 London bombing, being one of the first surgeons to treat the injured in that environment. How does that incident, dreadful, appalling though it is, but out of character to the general place, compare with when you're a war-torn environment when all of this carnage is going on around you?
As you said, there were 200 wounded from blast injuries inside these underground carriages, but they were in a first world trauma center, and suddenly, you had access to everything, and so there were systems, they were brought in from ambulance or by helicopter, and then they entered into a system and they had the scans that they needed, and they had the intensive care that they needed, and they had access to specialists in every discipline. That meant that their survival rate was much higher than I had been used to when I had worked in Gaza during the Second Intifada. But at the same time, it helped develop my sense clinically of what should be done. And it helped reinforce for me the importance of the work that I did in Gaza and the way it plays out in my NHS career at that time.
Now, we're speaking, Ghassan, to an international audience just now. What would you say to that audience about the environment that doctors, nurses, clinicians are practicing in Gaza at the present moment, and what is needed in terms of saving more lives? What would you say to people watching about the reality of the conditions of operating desperately, trying to save lives with bombs and raining down?
When I was in Gaza, I always felt that I was so lucky and blessed, is that I was operating and working without having to worry about the safety of my own children and my own family. And my colleagues who are still in Gaza, they go into work and they don't know these bombings, are they affecting the areas that they've left their kids? And so in terms of the resources, being unable to take the wounded to the operating room when is the right time to reduce the disability that they're going to end up with. But because there are so many of them that you don't get to them until the 5th or 6th day, or that you have to do with whatever consumables or medication that you have because you don't have any other choice. And so, and the fact that they've been doing it for now 7 months is so exhausting emotionally and intellectually and physically. Just that continuous stream for 7 months of human misery that takes its toll, but they're still there, and a degree of dedication that you can never explain.
Your work's been recognised internationally in Glasgow, but in Turkey, where you're a recipient of the International Peace Award. What's your relationship with Turkey?
So from the very beginning, when I came out of Gaza, one of the things that I was worried about, these medical students who were towards the end of their training in the 2 medical schools in Gaza that had been completely flattened by the Israelis. And we were working I was trying to find a way in which we can, for them, save their training. And for the health system in Gaza, save 300 future doctors from ending up with no training and a shortage at the time when Gaza needs it most. And it was really very early on that the Turkish government reached out and members of the Turkish parliament reached out and started to kind of take a lot of the students from Gaza and work out mechanisms in which medical students from the medical schools in Gaza can be taken on. And then the trip to Istanbul, when I received the award from TRT, it was quite an emotionally charged atmosphere, because you were just surrounded by people who felt that your struggle was their struggle.
This series is Turkish Tea Talk, and it's the therapeutic value, speaking from a professional point of view, the therapeutic value of Turkish tea.
Social life, not just in Turkey, but in the Levant, revolves around tea. It's a kind of, it's a focus for people to talk to each other.
Well, Dr. Abu-Sittah, I'm really glad you said that, because we in TRT wouldn't be too mean to send you away empty-handed. And therefore, we brought you your very own Turkish tea set.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. That's absolutely lovely. Thank you very much for that kindness.
For medicinal purposes.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much.